That the other side of Reb Usher's stories is that he gave hope. He said, if you really, really come to God, and if you come with a really, really broken heart, and really, really honestly, and not blaming God at all, but seeing that it's all coming from you, then God will help you with everything. This video was made possible through the kind support of my sponsors over at Patreon. Patreon is a great way to help independent creators like myself produce original content. If you'd like to get more English language videos from me, please consider becoming a supporter via Patreon. You can find the link in the description below. Thank you very much. It's the evening of October 7th. Although Jews are not very fond of commemorating events according to the Gregorian calendar, we have our own calendar, the Hebrew calendar. And according to the Hebrew calendar, the anniversary of the terrible massacre that took place on what the world knows as October 7th, it was in Simchat Torah, the holiday of Simchat Torah, which is still a few weeks away. But since the whole world has gotten used to calling this day, this event, the beginning of this war, as October 7th, and that's the date that most people use. It's also the date that's right now in Israel, is the date that most people are now focusing on all the people who were killed in that massacre, and all the ceremonies are now being held. So I'm going to address it a little bit. This class is not going to be about October 7th, and it's not going to be about the war. It's actually going to be something different. But in the background, we have this event. We have the thing that we are now 1 year into this war, 1 year of still missing and praying for our hostages to return, for all our soldiers to return safely, and more for all this darkness to be the cause of great light. It's already happening. We already seeing that from this terrible, terrible event, unbelievable positive things are coming into the world. The spirit that's blowing through the Jewish people and all over the world is something, regardless, not putting away or not putting down all the darkness. It's something that's so refreshing that we've been waiting for. And even more than that, it seems like the whole landscape, the whole political, military landscape of the Middle East is about to change, and things that should have happened years ago, decades ago. That's often how it happens. It happens that we wake up due to some terrible cataclysmic event. It shakes us up, wakes us up, and that's what we're witnessing. So the topic of today is really how to find light within darkness in a very broad way, in a very personal way. And we're going to do this by talking about a very special rabbi who lived in our generation. He passed away 21 years ago, who I personally feel very much connected to. And unfortunately, although his messages are extremely important for every Jew and non-Jew, every individual in the world, what he teaches is so vital to all our lives. It could be really revolutionary. But unfortunately, very few people know of him. Very few people have heard of him. Very few people have heard stories about him, read what he had to say, listened to what he had to say. He was a very modest man, a very humble man. But really one of the greatest rabbis of the recent generation. His name was Rav Usher Freund. But he is known by his disciples and everyone who knew him and everyone who talks about him. He's known as Reb Usher. Reb Usher because this is the way, the Ashkenazi, the Polish Ashkenazi way of pronouncing the name Asher. Asher is one of the 12 tribes. But it's pronounced as Usher. And he was known as Reb Usher. That's how everyone called him. That's how we will refer to him. He lived in Eretz Israel. He was actually born and raised in Jerusalem. He lived to the ripe old age of 93. He was born in 1910. He passed away in 2003, 21 years ago. And his yortzeit is a week from now. It's next Sunday. He passed away on Motzei Yom Kippur, following Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. He was old, like I said, it was 93, and the fast was too much for him, and he passed away that night. And he was born in Yerushalayim, so he was part of what we call the Yishuv Yashan, the old settlement, or the old inhabitants, those who have been for many generations in Jerusalem before the waves of immigration, the Zionist and other waves of immigration to the land of Israel. He was one of those families. And he was a Hasidic rabbi, but an unofficial Rebbe, we can call him. He didn't have like a court. He had disciples, he had followers. They were very loyal to him. They're still around, and they consider him as his Rebbe. He would teach, but he wasn't like a full-time Rebbe. He actually owned a jewelry shop on Yafo Street. And he founded one of the greatest, biggest, still operational charity fund, which is called Jad Ezra. It's still operational. You can see it all over the country. He founded it. He began it, and he dedicated much of his life to it. In many ways, if you read the stories about him, he really sounds like a modern-day Baal Shem Tov. In terms of his kindness, his chesed, his charity, and in terms of the very, very lively, potent, sparkling Torah that he would give away, that was coming, bleeding out of his heart, you can say. It was extremely authentic. And also in terms of the miracles he performed, like the abilities that he had, the supernatural abilities, the things he could know, that he could see, that he would be able to, the things that existed around him. It sounds like stories from the Baal Shem Tov, except the stories of the Baal Shem Tov, they all take place in, around the 18th century shtetls of Eastern Europe. And that has a sort of romantic air about it. You can imagine it, and then we picture it in the children's books. There's picturesque little towns and villages of the Jews with the wagons and the horses, and it's all very romantic. And with Reb Usher, it's very similar stories, but they take place in modern day Jerusalem, between the bus and the bank and the jewelry shop. And it's just unbelievable to think that a person like this existed in our generation, right here. I'm sad to say that I had one opportunity to meet him, and I passed on it. Something that I regret to this day. I was early Baal Tshuva. I lived in Jerusalem. Someone told me there's this very fascinating rabbi. Everyone talks about him, Reb Usher. Let's go. And I dismissed it. And I think it was one or 2 years before he passed away, and I missed my chance. What we do have now is all the stories. He didn't write books. His followers also at the time didn't write much of what he said. We have a book of letters that he wrote. It's called Imrei Asher. You can really feel his heart and the way he comforts people, the way he talks to people in those letters. And then there are books of stories. There was one very book that here it is right now. You can see his face also. So this is the man, Reb Usher. And this is quite a thick book published a few years ago with many stories about him, and some ideas that he gave over. And now what sparked this class for me was that now yet a new book, a thin one, just came out a few months ago, and I got it just before Rosh Hashanah. Ashrei Ha'ish is called. Nothing, as far as I know, of his works and his stories exists in English. So for an English speaker, there's absolutely no way, hardly anything, that you can connect to his teachings. There is another book that also didn't really come out. That was the first thing that I was exposed to. It's a book of 64 very short, cryptic, beautiful gems of stories that I thought he wrote them, and then I realized the student of his wrote that book. But it was all inspired by his teachings. And that was also not translated into English. But today, preparing this class, I saw one Jewish rabbi who started teaching those stories. He would read them in Hebrew and then translate them into English. He said he would do all 64, but he only did 10. And then he stopped. I don't know why. Later on, I can send you the links. and it's a bit hard. He reads the Hebrew in a very heavy Ashkenazi sort of accent, and then he reads the English. I'm going to read 2 or 3 later on directly in English for you. So an amazing character, and basically I just wanted to dedicate this class because his Yorted is a week away. We may have a class next Sunday, but it'll be dedicated probably to Sukkot. So, and it'll be after Yom Kippur. So now we're in the 10 days of awe, the 10 days of repentance, and I think his teachings are extremely vital. For me, they're life-saving. And I'll say one more thing, and maybe the most important thing, the connection, that the reason I heard about him, the reason I feel connected to him, the reason I discovered him, is because my own Rav, Rabbi Yitzchak Ginsburg, that those of you who know me, you know of him, and you know that he's my rabbi, and I get most of my teachings from him. He was very much connected to him. When he was young, he was actually almost like a family member. So he would spend time there, he would be very close to him. Now when people hear this, they're very, very surprised. And the reason is that Rabbi Ginsburg is known as being very much an intellectual, a Torah intellectual, but he's he's like a genius, and he's a mathematician, and his Torahs are very dense and very complex and very wordy and subtle and very cerebral, and they're also very spiritual, but they're also very cerebral. Whereas Rabbi Usher didn't have anything of the sort. He appeared to be a very simple rabbi, and the people who followed him were all very simple. They weren't the most educated or the most clever people, and he would talk to them on a very simple level. He would tell them, he would help them cope with their flaws and with depression, with being poor and with the illnesses, and he was that kind of Rebbe. He would really put his life and his energy and his heart into helping people in the lowest most points in the lowermost points in life, we can say, when you're most depressed, when you feel it's hopeless, and people would come to him with all their pains and all their hardships, and he would listen and he would help them. And you wouldn't connect Rabbi Ginsburg with this with Rabbi Usher, but this is very superficial. If you go beyond the superficial, when you listen to Rabbi Ginsburg, and basically all of Chassidut, including Chabad, which in itself is the most complicated and cerebral and intellectual Chassidut, at its heart, it's about very simple things. It's about being very tamim, that is very sort of sincere and wholehearted in your service of Hashem, and having simple faith. And that same simple faith is what drives Rabbi Ginsburg. He may be the most genius, rabbi out there, and he may have the most complicated Torah, but if you know how to listen, it's all about connecting us, and that's the heart of the matter, connecting us to the simple, very sincere faith in which you give everything to God. And it's not about you, and it's not about what you know, what you don't know. And let's say underneath this edifice of knowledge and wisdom, there's a foundation of knowing that we don't know anything, and being constantly grateful to God for teaching us and giving us the ability to even learn. So he got this from Reb Usher. From Reb Usher, he got his we'll talk about this, his lowliness, his sense of lowliness. That's a notion Rabbi Ginsburg keeps going on and on about. It's because Reb Usher would go on and on about it, and he got this from him. And it's also superficial because Reb Usher wasn't so simple as he appeared. He was a great scholar. He learned a lot of Torah, and when asked, it was clear that he was extremely knowledgeable, and he would be able to quote and know from here and there. But he didn't show it. He didn't show off. He didn't show this off. That wasn't his thing. His thing was something else. Okay, so going back to the just to wrap up this introduction, it's now the evening of October 7th. We want to dedicate this class to all the fallen from that day, from the many days that have passed, hundreds and hundreds of soldiers beyond the 1,200 civilians who were killed in that day, and we want to dedicate this class to the fighters who are right now fighting to save not just the land of Israel, the people of Israel, but really the entire world from a horrible, horrible regime that has spread its tentacles all over the Middle East on its way to the world, and Be'ezrat Hashem, As I said before, amazing things will come out of this war, God willing. And to dedicate it also to the hostages that the triumph will not be complete if they don't return. And we want to use this opportunity to connect to the Jewish tzaddikim, the great righteous Jews, and focusing now on this great rabbi, special Rabbi Usher. Okay, so this was just by way of introduction. And now, so who was this person? Who was this Rabbi Usher, and why do I think everyone should know him and everyone should learn from him? So, like I said, he grew up in Yerushalayim, and his father, interestingly enough, was a well-off man. He owned a bank, and he didn't have a poor childhood, but he did live a poor life. And the reason he lived a poor life, and this was evident from a very early age, was that he took nothing to himself. He kept nothing to himself. And there are stories about him from a very, very early age that he couldn't bear seeing other kids in his cheder, in his study place, who didn't have things. And he would give them their food, and he would ask his mother to prepare more food, and he would come with a whole bunch of bagels. He would have his mother bake all the bagels and come and sort of give them over. He once came home without his shoes and coat. Jerusalem is cold in the winter. He came home without his shoes and coat. Why? He saw someone in the street. He didn't have them. He gave them. Came home with socks, and he made an incredible impression on his family and his surroundings for being constantly seeing other people. The whole charity organization that he set up, Jad Ezra, he was totally hands-on, buying the vegetables, going over the vegetables. His home was like a storage place. His whole home was filled with crates of vegetables. The people say he would to make way for his bed. He would have to go between the tomatoes and the cucumbers and the onions, and he would sleep in there. It was crazy. The whole thing started when he would go to the marketplace, the Machne Yehuda market in Yerushalayim. At the end of the day, that's when they throw away all the vegetables that they didn't sell. It's the bad vegetables. But if you go over them, you find some that are good, and he would take all those that are still good, and he would take them and give them away, and that ended up being his big charity. So he was a man of chesed. His home was constantly full of people. People would come and pour their hearts out to him, and he would listen, and he would try and comfort them, but not comfort them in a cheap way. He would help them realize that all this darkness and all these difficulties are part and parcel of what their story is all about, that this is what life is all about. Life is going through the darkness and realizing it's part of you, and you are carrying your own flaws with you, and you have to rectify them, and all your challenges are just invitations for you to face the darkness within you and fix them. But it wouldn't be in a reproachful kind of way. It was very clear that he was implementing everything that he said on himself. He would listen, he would care, he would cry, he would be with you. I just heard someone, just now, Rosh Hashanah, I got this book, I read this book throughout the holiday. I was excited by this, and I told someone, and she said, oh, my mother used to go to him, and she would pour her heart out, and she would say all the hard things that are going on, and he would give her a painkiller. He would give her a little acamol, a little painkiller pill, and so it's great. It's funny, but it's not funny. It's amazing. It's like there's nothing. What can we do? Just listening, just being there, listening is the real gift. So he needs to give something. He would give her a symbolic little. I'm sure it would also amuse people to get this little they can buy it in the pharmacy, and he would give them this one thing, which is really a way of saying, I hear you, I'm with you, and now you're not alone. You're not alone. I can give you something symbolic that it's like a placebo. It's just something to encapsulate somehow the fact that I'm with you in your suffering and in your hardship. Now let's a few more details about his life, and then we'll go into some of the teachings and then some more stories, and then finally stories inspired by his teachings. His groups, his disciples he would stay with them much of the time. They would go to him for Shabbat and for Seudah Shlishit and for the fourth Seudah, the one on Motzei Shabbat. And he would prepare the food himself and give them. And they would travel many times to the resting places of tzaddikim, to Tziporin, especially to Meiron. He would go to Meiron, where Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is buried, all the time. Many stories taking place during those trips or over there. And they would go out to the forest and they would say Tehillim and they would cry. A very visceral kind of rabbi, we can say, right? And they would shout, they would cry, they would be together, and it was all about being very, very true and very real, and realizing that everything you have, everything good about you, everything good you're doing, it's all coming from God. So this is basically leading me up to basically the two main principles or pillars of his teachings. We can basically say as many teachings, but if you want to boil it all down, you get to two pillars. So the first pillar is a word I said before. It's the word lowliness. The word lowliness in Hebrew is shiflut. The master of shiflut in the Tanakh, in the Bible, is King David. King David was a king, so he was important. He was a soldier. He was a warrior. He had many achievements. But in a very foundational story, when he recaptures the Ark of the Covenant from the Philistines and brings it back to Yerushalayim, he dances with all the simple folk, with the servants and the maidservants. And his wife, Michal, the daughter of the previous king, Saul, she disapproves. She thinks a king should behave that way, and she rebukes him. And then he tells her, "V'nikaloti od mizot, I am even more lowly than all those servants that I'm dancing with." And then he says in Hebrew, "Ve'iti shafal be'enai, I was lowly in my own eyes. I don't consider myself better than them. In fact, I consider myself lower than them. I see it as a privilege that I can be their king, not as something that now they need to be below me. I'm below them. I'm serving them in a way." And so this word shiflut was constantly on Rabbi Usher's lips. And basically what he said, and this is sometimes unpleasant for people to hear. People are used to thinking that they're basically okay, but they have some flaws. They have some character traits that are not so good, and they can take care of maybe those traits, or maybe they can say, on the whole, I'm a good person, I'm a great person, but I have this flaw, or maybe that flaw, and then I can work on that flaw. Reb Usher would grind it into people that their flaws are an inherent part of them, that in many ways they are their flaws. They don't have a flaw. They are very deeply flawed. And all of our troubles and all of our sufferings is coming from not accepting this and not realizing this. And trying to, and then because then when we cheat ourselves, we tell ourselves that we are really good people and we deserve a very good life. And then those expectations cause us to be constantly disappointed and annoyed and angry that the world isn't behaving the way we think we deserve to be treated. And he says basically, when you have this self-image that you are essentially good, people today, almost all of coaching and almost all of self-help books are all about telling you that you're amazing and you're wonderful and you're great. And from Rabbi Usher's point of view, that creates the next depression, the next self-hatred, the next bout of darkness in your life. Why? Because you're feeding the idol that is your self-image as a wonderful person. And that idol bears down on you. It doesn't give you any fuel. It doesn't give you any help. It gives you a temporary warmth of thinking, imagining to yourself that you're a wonderful guy, you're a great guy. But then it ends up being a burden that you're carrying on your shoulders, this self-image of yourself as someone who's essentially great, but maybe has some flaws. And he would told you, no, you are essentially flawed. You have a flaw, and if you're a lemon, you don't become an apple, and if you're an apple, you don't become an orange. And you have to accept it. And once you start accepting your flaws, your inherent imperfection, your inherent problematic nature, then God's light can start shining through you. And then you'll be able to do good things and achieve good things. And you always have to remember, it's not you, it's God operating through you. Everything good you've ever done was because God helped you. So you yourself are you have to constantly feel that you're hopeless in a way. People don't like hearing this. They much prefer hearing things about themselves that they're flattering. But he would tell them, no. If you go past this and you're willing to accept that you're a mess, then you can start living, properly. And then you start being grateful, and then you start owning your flaws and your faults, and then you make room for God to intervene and to help you. And which leads me to the next pillar. So the first pillar is this. The next pillar is, if you're a mess, then what hope do you have? The hope you have is constantly clinging and cleaving to God. You can't move a muscle, you can't move an inch without God constantly right now giving you life. He would constantly say, God is right now giving you mouth-to-mouth respiration. Every breath. This was said of King David. King David said in Tehillim, Kol ha-neshama tehaleliyah, all my soul praises God. And since the word soul in Hebrew is the same root as the word breath, then the sages said, Chazal, they said, every breath you should be grateful for God. So this became an idiom, a slogan. People know this, but once it's a slogan, you stop hearing it. So you have to say it in new ways. And he would say it, you are being, every moment, every breath is a gift from God. And you have to totally acknowledge this. And it's like mouth-to-mouth respiration. He's breathing life into you. Another image is you're a baby suckling at his mother's breasts. And you don't have any existence yourself. And without your mother's milk, you don't have any life. And kegamul alei imo, this is also in Tehillim, in Psalms. Kegamul alei imo, like a baby suckling on his mother's breast. That's how King David felt. That's how we should all feel. And a term that he was very fond of saying, which is a little bit weird to understand in the beginning, I found it a bit strange until I realized what he was really talking about. He took a very, very simple Hebrew word, which is sibot. Siba is cause. Sibot is causes. And he would constantly talk about there being sibot, causes that help you and surround you. And the more you read it, the more you understand what he's talking about. What he called sibot, it was his own personal vernacular or vocabulary that he came up with. What he called sibot, or reasons or causes, are constant opportunities and chances that God throws your way in order to help you to connect to Him. And he said, if you pay attention, every time you're doing something good and every time you're avoiding doing something bad, it's because not from you, but God sent you a hint, a person, a thought, a feeling. He sent it to you in order to save you from that misdeed and to help you do a good deed. So you yourself would never do anything good. But then your conscience came up. What is your conscience? Your conscience is God within you. That was your siba. It was the reason you did this good thing. And he says you have to be very sensitive. And you have to notice every time you're about to do something wrong, something bad, if you notice, the moment before you do it, you're sent a siba, you're sent a cause, a hint. Could be something you see in the corner of your eye, could be something you hear, could be a thought, could be a memory. It comes there, it's like a lifeboat to save you from doing that mistake. Now it's very easy not to notice it, because our urges and inclinations and desires are very, very, that's like the ocean you're about to drown in. But if you notice, on the ocean there floats a little raft, a little something you can hold on to, like a life. How do you call this? Like a lifeline or a life, something you can you grab onto, and that is God sending you a siba. Now, the word siba, he didn't say this. The word siba, it comes from the word sivuv, lesovev. It's all about things are the causes of nature, the cause and effect chain of nature. It's like circles within circles, and basically it's coming from God's encircling lights. God isn't manifestly present in our lives in the sense that He's manifestly present, like if you're a prophet. We don't have prophets, so God is present in roundabout ways. This is the image of the circle. So Siba comes from Sivuv, comes from the Or Sovev, the surrounding lights. It's a roundabout way. God is sending you all these signs and images. He says that when we pass away, He once told someone, you think the suffering, listen, as you tell you, you can't read Him every day, all day. You have to read Him every once in a while, because sometimes it's too. So he said, you think suffering ends in this world? It doesn't end. Your soul continues to suffer in the world to come. The only difference is now you can do something about it. It's not the easiest thing in the world to hear. So we would say that when we go up, and when Mashiach comes, we're all going to be shown a movie of all our lives, and we're going to see how every time before we did something wrong, we had this siba, we had a chance, we had an opening, like a portal opening, that you could have been saved from that mistake, from the bad thing you did, and you missed it, and you're going to be anguished at how you missed it. So don't miss those opportunities. Notice them, take note of them, and sin is constantly luring and it's like a chasm open under our feet. He would always use this, just like you need to be constantly breathed life into, so the chasm of darkness is constantly open under your feet. And if you're acutely aware of this, you're also acutely aware of all the different lifelines that you're being thrown. Okay, so now some stories. That's the two pillars of his teachings. Which you have to read, in many different ways and versions to let it seep in. Now, a few stories about him. So one story is that one of the trips he took to Meiron, he had a suitcase with him. In the suitcase, he had a lot of money that he made from a major deal that he did with the jewelry. He just sold a major piece of jewelry, and that was basically his money for his livelihood for some time. And including other things that people owed him, that he took, whatever. He had a big suitcase, and he went there with one of his students, and he would always go to the forest to lehit boded, right, to be alone and to speak to God. And he told him, please look after, and he stressed very much, please look after the suitcase, because it's very valuable. And so the guy took the suitcase, and Rabbi Usher went into the forest for whatever long he took, and he came back, and the guy was guarding it, but at one moment, he lost his concentration, and someone realized the suitcase must be very valuable, and he took it. And the guy was at a complete loss. He didn't know what to do. His heart was beating. He was pale. He was going crazy because he was stressed so much that he mustn't lose the suitcase, and it was stolen. Rabbi Usher comes from back from the forest, and he sees him, and immediately he understood what happened, and he came to him, and he was like pale and shaking, and he told him, Rabbi Usher told him, did you eat lunch already? Did you have anything to eat? And he said, no. What's the suitcase? I said, no, never mind. Did you eat anything? So I have a good salad there. I have a good bread. Let's sit and eat. And you need to eat. You need to rest. And that's what they did. And they came back, and he never, ever, ever mentioned the whole thing to him ever again. So one story. Another story. There are some stories that are more like supernatural. One story is that a couple came to him. They didn't live in Eretz Israel. They lived in Europe somewhere, in abroad somewhere. And the husband had this issue that he would get angry and shout until the wife couldn't take it anymore. She couldn't take his shouting. So they came to Reb Usher. Reb Usher spoke to the husband, and got him to commit to not shouting anymore. He may be told whatever he said, and he really made a promise that he's not going to do it anymore. And then they came back, and it was great. It worked, and he was able to stop himself and to realize that he has this nature, and he can't change his nature, has to accept his nature. Once you accept your nature, you can start working with it. And it worked. But a few months later, something happened, something provoked him. He lost his temper again, started shouting. As he was shouting, the phone rings. He picks up the phone. Who is this? It was Rabbi Usher from Eretz Israel. He told him, I told you to stop shouting. You said you promised you would shout anymore. And this happened more than once. There was one guy, he lived in France, and he was angry at his son, and his son was very, disrespectful. He did something very bad, and he was so angry, he locked him up in the attic for a while. And he did it, and he got a phone call. It was Reb Usher. He said, what are you doing to your son? I can't sleep. I can't sleep with what you're doing to your son, please. People would stay in line to be to come to meet him. And then all of a sudden, one of his helpers comes out, and he goes to one particular guy, and he says, Reb Usher says your sadness is really disturbing him. He can't concentrate with your sadness. He says, how do you know it was me? He said the Yemenite. He said the Yemenite is sad, and you're the only Yemenite here in the room I can see. So, so unbelievable stories. Another story, a tiny little story. It's their famous story about Reb Zusha. Reb Zusha, this story was told in a Farbrengen, in a meeting, in a gathering to celebrate the Yortzeit, the passing of Reb Zusha. Reb Zusha, one of the greatest Hasidic rabbis of the third generation of Hasidut. It was well known that him and his brother, Rabbi Elimelech of Lizhansk, they would travel all over Poland, Ukraine, wherever it was, all those shtetls. And one of the things they would do is they would get to a place, and they could see in their Holy Spirit, the Ruach HaKodesh, the misdoings of people there, their averot, what they did wrong. They could tell. They could look at their face and they could tell. And then they would sit there, and Reb Zusha would tell Rabbi Elimelech, he would confess out loud that he did the same thing. Or he would be alone, and he would confess doing the same thing, and they would talk about it, and the guy who really did that thing would overhear it, and then he would tell them, and he would come, and he would tell them, I also did the same thing, and then they would say, let's do tshuva together, let's repent together. So someone told this story, and Reb Usher said, but obviously, it's unlike Rabbi Zusha to lie or to do such tricks. He didn't do tricks. He would hear someone say, he would see, or be able to tell that someone was doing an Avera, and he would find it within himself that he actually did the same Avera, even if it was more subtle. And then he would really repent out loud for doing that, and the guy could participate. The guy would come and say, well, I also did the same thing. And they would participate. But obviously, he wasn't a game. It was a real thing. He really noticed. Another related story. Someone was going around telling terrible things about Reb Usher in Yerushalayim, that he did this, that he did that. It was obviously all false. That he lied, that he did this, he did whatever. And another important rabbi couldn't take it anymore, and he told him, let's do something. Let's call him out for his lies. Let's tell everyone that he shouldn't be trusted. Let's expose him, because he's going around spreading all these things about you. And Reb Usher said, no, everything he's saying is true. So the other rabbi was, what? Are you saying you really did those things? He said, well, at the last moment, Hashem always stops me, but I could have done them. I could have done all those things that he said. I have all the same inclinations. What can I do that God is saving me every time from doing those things? But I could have done the same thing. It's not beyond me. I'm prone to all of those things. I'm prone to everything. People would tell him, how come you're so having all this chesed, all these good deeds that you're doing, that you're giving, and your house is a house of giving? He said, I'll tell you the secret. He said, I'm terribly, terribly stingy. I'm horribly stingy. So I'm doing davka. I'm doing it on purpose against my own yetzer hara. I'm giving all this away. I'm giving everything that I have away in order to annoy my stinginess, because this is really the way I really am. One day there was some madman going in the house. His house was full of people all the time, and he was shouting and he was doing things that are improper, whatever. And even his family couldn't take it anymore. And they told him, let's kick him away. And he says no. And he says, why don't you kick him away? He says, is this my home? It's not my home. It's God's home. It's not.
So again, those stories are not everyone can live like that, but it's really something very incredible. Another story. Once he went to his jewelry shop with a friend, with a student, and then he says, "You know what? Hang on, I have to go to one place." He took him to a side street. He says, "Wait for me 1 minute, just 1 minute. I have to do something in this apartment." He came in, and he came out after 4 hours. And the student was very loyal. Reb Usher told me to stay. I'm staying. And he could hear shouting from the house, horrible shouting. But he heard that the shouting gradually subsided. And then Reb Usher came out, and the couple that lived there, they walked him to the door, and they continued walking to the jewelry shop. You can tell the jewelry shop wasn't open in regular hours. So the guy asked him, "What happened?" He says, "I'll tell you, this couple has a very hard relationship, and every once in a while I have to help them. As we were walking in the street, I felt that they needed my help. So I came in, and it turns out I came in at a terrible, terrible fight. They were throwing chairs at one another. One of them tore the phone out of the cord, and the house was a total mess. And I got in, I didn't know what to do. I was at a loss myself," said Reb Usher. "I didn't know what to do. And somehow God helped me. I put them in separate rooms so that they would calm down. And then I had to clean the whole living room up because I knew that I wouldn't be able to help them at all if the house was in such a mess. Nothing would have come out of it. So I put all the chairs in place and I put everything in place. And then I went to speak to one of them. I went to speak to the other one. Then I put them together and I got them to come down. And you saw they walked me to the door. And then he said, "I don't know how long it will last. But that's not for us to decide. We can do whatever we can with the opportunities given to us, the utmost that we can, and from now on, we can't control it." I'll tell you another story. This was actually a long story, but I'm going to cut it short. So one day, in what is called the fourth seudah, the fourth meal of Shabbat, which is really after Shabbat, Motzei Shabbat, sometimes it's customary to make a fourth meal. And he would be the one cutting up the salad, giving everything. And then one of his disciples came, and he brought with him someone from the synagogue, someone from France. And Reb Usher could see that this guy was very impressive. People would be impressed by him. They would talk to him, and that was also the reason the guy brought him from the shul. He would fascinate everyone and talk with everyone. And Reb Usher saw and gave him a look, and then this guy says, "You're the person I was looking for." And Reb Usher told him, "And did you really, really come? Like, are you really here seriously, or do you want to?" And the meaning was like, "Are you playing around? Are you seriously here?" And he said, "Yeah." And he said, "Okay, please wait for me as I finish making up the meal and giving it to everyone, but don't do anything too foolish." That's what Reb Usher said to this French person who just came to his home. And then it turns out this guy said that he had supernatural abilities. And everyone in the room, there were many people there also at the synagogue. He did this and that at his home. He would put his hands on the table, and then he would look at the spaces between the fingers, and that would somehow inspire him. And then he would look at a person, and he would be able to know things about this person, how many siblings he have, how many children he has. He looked at all the people. He told each one of them how much money exactly he has in his pocket, and it was all true. And Reb Usher came in, and he was impressing everyone and talking with everyone about this. And Reb Usher was first silent, and he was talking and making a big show of himself. And every once in a while, Reb Usher put in one word, another word. Finally, he started arguing with him, and he told him, "Everything you're doing, it's no big deal. I can do everything you're doing." And then he started telling him exactly where he's from in France, where he grew up, how it looks like, how his house looks like. And the guy was taken aback. And then he told him, "But what you're doing is completely wrong. And you got this from an impure source." He said, "No, I didn't get it from anywhere. I learned it myself. I just have it." He says, No. You got it from an impure source. You know what I'm talking about. And you should know that your father is very, very displeased and is suffering very much. So then the guy goes silent. And he says, then he tells everyone, my father disappeared in the Holocaust. Nobody knows if he passed away or not. And I'm searching for him. And in fact, one of the reasons I'm here is searching for him. And also, I saw the reason he told in the beginning is that I was looking for you. He saw the face of Reb Usher in front of his face for weeks. He didn't know where he was, and he ended up coming to his place. And also, he's looking for his father, but he doesn't know where his father is. And he asked Reb Usher, how do you know where my father is? He says, your father is no longer in this world. He passed away in the Holocaust. But neither is he in a resting place, because he's suffering very much from what you're doing. Everything you're doing is just one big show-off. And you should be doing it, and you got it from impure source. And then he makes him confess that he learned this from a particular woman who was a non-Jewish woman, and it turns out he has an affair with this woman. And it told him that's also the reason you're not getting married. He was nearing 40 or around 40, this guy. And then he starts telling him, you're supposed to marry a Jewish woman from Holland, from the Netherlands. She's very similar to that French woman, but she is your real zivug, your real spouse. And this woman that you're seeing, that from whom you learned everything you're doing, is a horrible person, and she would make her life miserable. And then he took a fork and a spoon. And he showed the fork and the spoon, if you look at their handles, they look absolutely the same. And then they have a little curve, which is like a hill. And if you put them on the table and you're standing on the handles, and that little curve, you can't see standing, if you're an ant standing on the handle, and you look at the little curve, you can't know if it's a fork or a spoon. But if you go up to the curve, then one piece of cutlery leads you to something that's round, and that can give you soup, and that can contain you, and that's your house, and that's the spoon. And the other one is you can't. It's full of holes, and it's sharp, and it stings you, and it's like daggers, and it'll kill you. And it was very long. The whole thing was like 4 hours. They ended up in 2 a.m. Everyone there was fascinated. And he got him to the point that he was totally confused and crying. And he said, you have to accept that you're not seeing that other woman anymore, and you're causing suffering to your Father in heaven, and to yourself, and to that woman in Holland who is waiting for you. She's so patient. She's waiting for her real spouse. And all of this is because of you. And you're using all these powers just for your ego. And when you meet the right woman, you'll be able to convert all those powers for holiness, and you'll be able to see that you can see not just all the little silly details that you're seeing, but you'll be able to see everything, and you'll be able to see your own Father, and you'll have everything because you'll be connected to the holy root. And this guy was crying and confused, and then he said that he accepts it, that he's not going to see that woman anymore, and he's going to start looking for the real woman in Holland and to really do tshuva. And then he left. And then a few weeks later, the guy who's telling this whole story met Reb Usher, and he says, do you have any idea what happened with this guy in the end? And the Reb Usher said, he sighed, and he said, you think the Baal Davar is like the Satan or the Yetzer Hara, the other side, the side of temptation and of klipot. He says, you think they're going to give up on someone like him so easily? He came back, and he's still very confused, and we have to continue to daven for him. And it's not in my hands. That's the end of the story. We don't know the end of the story. Not everything has a happy ending. That's a very Reb Usher thing. Not everything has a happy ending. He shows you that God is giving you the opportunities and the chances and the lifeboat. But if you take it or not, it's up to you, and you can miss your opportunity, and you can cause that suffering. It's not sugar-coated at all, his stories. And that's how this story ends, and nobody knows what happened in the end with this guy. I have this dream of meeting this Dutch woman one day, and maybe hearing the story, if it ended up good or bad, and who knows. Anyway, that's another story. Now we're going to, a few more minutes, I'm going to read to you, we'll see how many, 2 or 3 stories that were, like I said, written by a student of his. Apparently was the same guy who used to drive him around. He's as modest as Rabbi Usher. He didn't sign the book. So I have no idea who he is. The book was never published. I first got it. Let's see if I have it. I first got it as a PDF. As a PDF that looks like this. Right? It's just the stories. No front page, no headline. It's 64 short stories. I printed this. And then I saw that it came out in another PDF that was a bit more designed, but again, no credit, just a phone number where you can get it. And an amazing treasure. It's just unbelievable. This thing wasn't translated and wasn't published and isn't out. It's just amazing. Some of it is very cryptic, but some of it is amazing. I'm going to read to you. We'll start with one. So the first story is called The Story of the Fallers. Those who fall, hanuflim. There were beings who were walking and continually falling. There were these people, they constantly fell. While the rest of the world walked and arrived at their destinations, these people would walk and fall. They became very discouraged, wondering how come the whole world keeps on moving forward while they keep falling and falling. A wise man came to them. The wise man in the stories is probably Reb Usher himself all the time. A wise man came and said to them, at the very least, get up and continue walking. What can you do? Just get up and continue walking. They listened to his advice and would get up and continue walking, only to fall again. Then they would rise once more, and the world began calling them the fallers, those who fall, the falling. That's how everyone called them. They had a label. They became so accustomed to falling that it was a great wonder to them how they were able to rise and stand. In fact, when they fell, it felt familiar. And when they managed to stand, they were astonished. It was no big deal when they fall. Everyone would call them the falling, so falling was their natural state. But the big deal was that they could get up again. Eventually, they began to call themselves the risers, amazed at the miracle that they could rise at all. And then the whole world began to call them the risers. End of story. End of story. This is very Reb Usher, because Reb Usher told you, you are fallen, you are falling, that's who you are. By the way, David, he was probably a reincarnation of King David. King David is called by Chazal Bar Nafla. Bar Nafla is the falling. Why? He was never supposed to be born, King David. King David lived exactly 70 years. And it is said that he wasn't supposed to be born at all. He was supposed to be a miscarriage. But Adam, the first human being, Adam saw that one day this amazing messianic soul will come into the world, King David, and he will not be born. Because he is a falling, he is a faller. He is going to fall. In Hebrew, a miscarriage is called hapala, and the baby, the fetus that falls is called that isn't born, is stillborn. That's called nefil. It's all coming from the word lipol. In fact, the English word to fall comes from the Hebrew word nefilat, nafal. So Adam gave David 70 years of his own life. That's why Adam lived exactly to 930 years. He was supposed to live to a full round 1,000. And he is a 70 shy of 1,000. So he gave those 70 to David. So David is the faller. So we are all like King David, and we're constantly resuscitated by God. And the chiddush, the novelty, the surprising, the astonishing thing is that we rise. So that's one story. Another story. A story of a man who had a stone in his heart, and it weighed heavily upon him. He wanted to cast it away, but didn't know how. He tried various strategies, but none succeeded, and he grew more and more distressed. He sought advice, and people gave him the usual suggestions, but nothing helped. The burden on his heart grew ever heavier, and he wondered what fate had befallen him, that he must carry such a stone in his heart, and how he could possibly throw it away. He went to a wise man and asked how he could rid himself of the stone in his heart. The wise man answered, "Don't throw away the stone, carry it." That's the story. You have to carry the stone. The stone is your livelihood. The stone is your life, and you're not supposed to get rid of it. And it's beautiful because we have a heart of flesh and a heart of stone. And here he's saying that it's one and the same in many ways. Accepting the stoniness of your heart, that's how it can become flesh. Another similar close story, it goes like this. A story of a man whose soul bird had been uprooted. This is a phrase in Hebrew, tzipor hanefesh. Tzipor hanefesh is the bird of your soul. It's the most precious thing for you. Right? October 7th, people lost so much loved ones. And people are walking around with a black hole in their hearts. And this is a man whose soul bird had been uprooted. He wandered in sorrow, saying, "I will put an end to my life, or my death would be better than my life." But then he thought, who knows what will happen to me there, in the afterlife? And he abandoned that path. He said, since everything is from the heavens, and this is what has befallen me, I will throw stones at the heavens. So he threw stones at the sky, and saw that an even greater darkness enveloped him. Because it doesn't help being angry at heavens. He said, since my soul bird has been uprooted, what shall I do to revive myself? He stood and said, Master of the universe, isn't everything from you? Even what is happening to me now is from you. And surely it is all for the good. But how will I sustain myself? Perform for me a sign for good so that I may live. And he was answered from heavens, what you think is that your soul bird has been uprooted. On the contrary, your soul bird has returned to you. The gap, the space, the void, that's your soul bird. That's your real soul bird. And though it is wounded and in pain, make prayers from that. Convert, transform the soul bird, which you thought was the absence of a soul bird. You thought it was taken away. It wasn't. This hole in your heart, that's your soul bird. And that's where your prayers should come from. So he went and prayed much, and what had been bitterer than death became sweeter than honey for him. But the other side of Reb Usher's stories is that he gave hope. He said, if you really, really come to God, and if you come with a really, really broken heart, and really, really honestly, and not blaming God at all, but seeing that it's all coming from you, then God will help you with everything. And by the way, he also helped people. People would come to him with around his neighborhood, in Yerushalayim, people would come for him from every reason, every little thing that happened to them, everything that was wrong, every decision they came to him, and he helped all of them. And then they asked him, what can we do after you pass away? And he said, you'll come to my resting place and I'll continue to help you. I can tell you my wife went there very, very often. When we lived in Yerushalayim, she would go there all the time. And whenever she's in Yerushalayim, she goes there again. I'm not such a big person of prayers. But I also go every once in a while. A story of a desert. There was a man who had a difficulty living in a settled place. So he left the inhabited area and distanced himself to the wilderness until he fully entered the wilderness, the desert. He found relief as he wandered the vast desert, seeing all the mountains and expanses before him. And his heart eased within him. He began to feel mysterious longings that grew stronger, though he did not know what they were. He looked up at the sky. He looked up at the sky and saw a black dot moving closer and closer, and he realized it was a stork. It came down near him, and as he walked on his way, the stork hopped alongside him on the ground. Now you should know that the word stork in Hebrew is chasidah, which is the female of a chassid. A chassid is chassidut, someone who's... This is like his chassidic neshama, his chassidic soul, that he could only discover in the desert. He couldn't find this stork in the city where he would live with all the people around him. He had to go all the way to the wilderness, and then it was a little dot, and it came closer and closer, and it became a stork, and it walked pranced next to him. He would prance next to him as he would walking, but the story isn't over. His heart filled with great love for the bird, and all those hidden longings became enveloped in that love. The stork began to fly and circle around him, rising higher and higher until it disappeared. Finally, he loved the stork so much, he found what he was looking for, and then it disappeared. He was astonished, but then it returned, and he rejoiced with it as before. Again, it rose and vanished. Then it returned once more. This is called Ratzo Veshov, run and return. It's the run and return of the soul. He felt eternally connected to it. And finally he asked the stork, when you ascend, where do you go? And when you return, why do you return? The stork replied, now it's speaking. When I ascend, I see all the deserts that you still have to cross. And when I return to become closer to you. And he was very glad to have found the stork in the desert. That's the end of the story. The stork is his neshama, that's his soul. And the soul, every once in a while, first it takes time to find it. You have to distance yourself from the city, from the noise, from other people. You have to be alone. And until it starts at a little dot, and it goes bigger, you discover your soul. And once you discover it, all of a sudden, every once in a while, it disappears. Why does it disappear? It goes up, and for you, it's a feeling of darkness, your soul disappearing. But really, your soul is looking at all the deserts, which are here, not that bad places. It's good places. It's higher and higher areas, stretches of life that you still have to discover. Because in the desert, he discovered it. So the soul has to go up in order to reconnect those moments of absence, of hiddenness, that he can't see the bird of the soul. That's where he draws the power to cross the next deserts and what still awaits him. But then when it comes back, it becomes even closer to him. Every time the stork comes back, it's closer to him. But then it disappears again to give him koach, to give him strength, to go through all the difficulties and hardships and problems that are still await him, and to rediscover himself in that wilderness. The wilderness is both a place of suffering and confusion, and it's also a place where you discover yourself, your soul, your Torah. So I think it's a beautiful story. And again, it's not Reb Usher, but it's a teaching inspired by Reb Usher, by his student. And all I can still do is say that I hope one day more of his teachings will be available in English. And maybe if God gives me strength, I'll be able to help find maybe the right people, the right persons to somehow maybe set up a website. God, I'm getting myself in trouble now. But I think it would be, I see all your nice faces, and I see how you enjoyed these stories, and I think about all the people who can benefit from his teachings in English. So hopefully, Be'ezrat Hashem, we'll be able to spread more of his teachings around. Again, it's not for every day and every time of the week. Some of it is extremely, it wrenches you out. It's for me, it's not enough. I need some other Torah, that's more would occupy my head and would inspire me to see all the divine lights that are in the world and can be rectified and elevated, which is what I like doing most of the time. But every once in a while, I have to go back to Reb Usher, and Reb Usher grounds me. He grinds me and he grounds me, and he connects me back to my root and my ground. And may we all carry our stones, carry our voids, and from that void and from that stone, discover all our prayers and lift them up and transform our darkness into light.
Hi everyone, if you enjoyed this episode, please press like, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment. If you want more English language videos from me, please consider becoming a supporter via Patreon. You can find the link in the description below. Thank you very much, and see you in the next episode.